Imagine yourself lying quietly in bed, in a room where most of the lights have already been turned down. A soft glow drifts through the window frame, where the night sky is slowly opening. Outside, space feels like a deep velvet curtain stitched with tiny specks of light. The stars shimmer calmly, as if they have been there for a very long time, longer than the entire history of humanity as we know it. The noise of the day has slipped far behind you. The worries, the plans, the news, the calls and emails, all of it fades away like a thin trail of smoke. What remains is the gentle rhythm of your own breathing and the vast night sky waiting to be heard. In that stillness, we begin another kind of journey, one shaped by imagination and by a question that feels both very distant and very close. You might imagine that somewhere out there, Earth is slowly turning along its orbit, like a small blue marble drifting through an ocean of cosmic emptiness. Beneath you lies an entire planet, with its rocky crust, its deep oceans, its forests, its mountains, its glowing cities, and countless living creatures who are breathing, moving, and dreaming. Above you is the sky, where light from stars hundreds or thousands of light years away is only now reaching this place. Everything exists together in the quiet moment where you're listening to this story. When we look up at the night sky, something strange happens. We feel small, yet somehow connected to something far greater. Those tiny dots of light are actually distant suns, and perhaps their own planets are circling around them right now. Every star, every planet holds a long story, a history we haven't learned yet. The universe is like an endless library, and we have only read the first few lines. In that vast expanse, our Earth is like a small island in a dark ocean. On that island, humanity appeared, built homes, cities, satellites, space stations, and the stories of science, the dreams of reaching the stars. Sometimes, in our rush to build and create, we forget that we arrived here very, very late. Earth's history spans billions of years, while the history of modern humans is just a thin sliver in that enormous book. Lying under the night sky, in this quiet air, you can allow yourself to step outside the busyness of everyday life and look at Earth as if you were just a visitor passing through. If you were a space traveler who had just landed on this planet after a long journey, what would you see? You'd see the traces of roads, buildings, power grids, satellites orbiting overhead, all whispering, a civilization is alive here. And then, very gently, a question rises, soft as a breeze. Are we truly the first civilization ever to leave its mark on this planet? It's not a loud question. It's more like a passing thought that appears when you stare at the sky long enough, when you realize that Earth's timeline isn't like the timeline of a single life. A human life may last a few decades. A civilization might endure for a few thousand years. But Earth has existed for about 4.5 billion years, so long that our minds can hardly grasp it. It's like standing before an ocean. You can touch its surface, but you can't possibly hold all that water at once. If Earth's history were a 24-hour film, our entire industrial civilization, trains, airplanes, the internet, satellites, would only appear in the final few seconds before the credits roll. So what happened in all the hours and minutes before that? Could it be that somewhere in an earlier part of the film, another civilization rose, thrived, and vanished, leaving behind only faint traces deep in the rock, or perhaps erased entirely by time? You might listen to that question the way you listen to a very soft melody. It doesn't need an immediate answer. It only needs a little space to exist in your mind, flowing gently with your breath. Are we truly the first civilization on Earth? Or was there another story, another chapter, written long before us? In the tender darkness of your room, you can feel the contrast between the small, warm world around you and the cold, boundless universe outside. And somehow, that feeling of smallness makes you feel freer. When you understand that you are just a tiny part of the universe's long history, the weight on your shoulders becomes lighter. You don't need to solve everything right now. You only need to listen and let your thoughts drift slowly across these big questions. The story we're about to explore together isn't a news bulletin, nor a dry lecture. It's more like a slow, nighttime walk, moving gently, looking up at the stars, thinking while letting yourself relax. We'll wander through what we know about Earth's history, its geology, and the traces humanity leaves in the layers of stone. We'll imagine possibilities that feel strange but not impossible. That perhaps, long ago, another civilization existed, with its own ideas and dreams, also looking up at the sky and asking the very same questions we ask now. But that comes later. Right now, in this opening chapter, all you need is to let your mind slow down. Let the sparkling night sky become a great blanket covering every worry. Let each star be a soft, steady beat, like a lullaby the universe is humming just for you. In the midst of all that vastness, our small question drifts in and out, rising and dissolving and returning again. Are we truly the first civilization on Earth? Or was there another story, another page written long ago and gently closed by time? If that question makes your eyelids a little heavier, if it slows your breath just a bit, let it happen. You don't need to hold on to every idea. Just know that somewhere among countless stars, somewhere in the endless flow of time, we are opening a story together. And you can listen, and drift, and slowly fall asleep, while the universe continues whispering the rest. Beneath the gentle night sky we've just shared, a question rises like a whisper from the far edge of the universe. Could we truly be the very first civilization on this planet? And from the quiet breath of that question, our story continues to unfold. Slowly, softly, as if you were taking a few small steps farther down a silent path that winds through the nighttime landscape of imagination. Now let's let our minds drift a little away from the endlessness of the cosmos and begin looking closer. At Earth itself, the place where humanity lives, creates, and dreams. In the stillness of night, the storyteller smiles softly and continues speaking in that same gentle night breeze voice. But this time, there's a hint of curiosity woven into it, a touch of eager wonder. So then, are we truly the first? Think about it. From childhood until now, we've always been told that the story of humanity is the only story of intelligence ever written on Earth. That we are the first beings to build walls and cities, to craft machines, to write, to draw maps, to send satellites into space. But are we so certain that this history hides no chapter we've never opened? This isn't a declaration, nor a dramatic conspiracy. It's more like a drifting thought in a peaceful evening, a quiet idea floating through the mind as you gaze at the stars and wonder. The universe is so vast, and Earth is so ancient. Are we truly the first voices of intelligence? In science fiction, the idea of prehistoric civilizations rising on Earth long before humans has been around for ages. Some stories imagine brilliant societies that flourished and then disappeared, leaving behind nothing but fragments of legend. One of the most famous of these tales is Atlantis, an ancient continent said to have possessed remarkable knowledge and technology before vanishing beneath the sea in a single night. Though that story lives only in myth, perhaps shaped more by ancient fears and imagination than any real event, it continues to be retold because it touches something deep within us. The intuition that maybe there was something before us. But of course, Atlantis, if it ever existed at all, would belong only to a few thousand years ago. Meanwhile, our Earth has undergone billions of years of change. The window of time is far wider than most of us ever imagine. And among the stacked layers of stone, among the fossils buried in darkness, could a civilization so ancient have existed that every trace of it has long since dissolved into the earth, crushed, buried, erased by the restless movement of the planet itself? Questions like that often make us feel as though we're standing before an enormous doorway, one that opens into a distant, mist-covered past, where things we've never known might once have taken shape. And the remarkable thing is, this question doesn't appear only in fairy tales or fiction. Even in real science, a few people have wondered the same thing. The storyteller's voice slows just a little now, as if sharing a gentle, delightful secret. You know, there have been scientists who asked this question quite seriously. They weren't trying to write stories or stir up conspiracy theories. They simply wanted to understand our planet more deeply. These scientists never claimed that an ancient civilization truly existed. They weren't imagining industrial cities built by dinosaurs or crystal metropolises hidden beneath the sea. What they asked instead was, if such a civilization had once existed, would we be able to tell today? And how? This became the beginning of a new line of thought, one where imagination and science meet gently, like two streams flowing into each other. And interestingly, for these scientists, this wasn't a joke at all. It was a thought experiment, one that helps us understand the geological fingerprints our own civilization is leaving behind, and how to distinguish those fingerprints from natural events in Earth's deep past. And they gave this thought experiment a name that feels both familiar and mysterious, almost like something out of science fiction, yet actually rooted in a very specific idea: the Silurian Hypothesis. So what exactly is the Silurian Hypothesis? Why was it given that name? And what does it reveal about the hidden history of our planet? In the next part, we'll step gently into those questions, slowly, calmly, like someone turning one more page of a book on a peaceful night. For now, you can let the question, "Are we truly the first?" linger in the air a little longer. It isn't demanding an answer. It's simply inviting you to keep journeying with me through layers of time, layers of stone, and layers of possibility shaped by both science and imagination. And when you're ready, we will move forward to the place where the word Silurian begins to hum softly, like a distant call from the ancient past. When people first hear about the Silurian Hypothesis, they might imagine it as some kind of mystical tale or ancient legend. But in reality, this idea comes from a scientific paper published in 2018 by two respected researchers. Adam Frank, an astrophysicist who studies the possibility of life beyond Earth, and Gavin Schmidt, a climate scientist at NASA. Neither of them is the type to chase conspiracies or unscientific claims. They simply wanted to widen the horizon of the questions science is allowed to ask. At its core, the Silurian Hypothesis is a thought experiment. It doesn't try to prove anything. Instead, it poses a simple, fascinating question. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth long before humans, millions of years ago, would modern science be able to detect any trace of it? And if we could, what would those traces look like? This question wasn't meant to argue that such a civilization actually existed. Rather, It was meant to help us understand what traces our own civilization is leaving behind for the far future. Imagining scientists millions of years from now digging into the layers of rock from our era is a powerful way to ask, would they be able to tell that humans were ever here? To explore these far-reaching questions, Frank and Schmidt started by analyzing what human activity, industry, metallurgy, fossil fuel combustion, nuclear testing, will leave behind in the geological record. Then they flipped the question around. If an earlier civilization had done similar things, their traces might resemble the ones we're creating today. The name Silurian was inspired by the science fiction series Doctor Who. In that show, the Silurians are an intelligent reptilian species imagined as ancient inhabitants of Earth who built a flourishing civilization long before humans. Even though the name doesn't match the actual geological Silurian period, it perfectly captures the purpose of the thought experiment: to evoke the idea of an intelligent species from the deep past, whose civilization vanished without leaving obvious remains on Earth's surface. What's important is that Frank and Schmidt themselves did not consider this hypothesis likely. They stated clearly that they strongly doubted any industrial civilization existed before humans. Still, they chose to ask the question, because sometimes asking a question matters just as much as answering it. By posing it, they hope to develop new methods for studying the long-term traces of our own civilization and for distinguishing natural geological signatures from artificial ones. The heart of the Silurian hypothesis isn't about believing or disbelieving in ancient civilizations. It's about recognizing that if such a civilization had existed, its evidence, if any remains, would be buried deep in Earth's own structure. Unusual sediment layers, shifts in isotope ratios, soil layers containing strange materials, or signs of unusual climate events. These wouldn't necessarily be stone cities, tools, or artifacts you could hold in your hand. Earth constantly renews its surface, erasing almost all human-made structures within just a few million years. So if an ancient civilization left anything behind, it would most likely exist only as subtle geological signatures. The Silurian hypothesis encourages scientists to look closely at geological anomalies: a sediment layer unusually rich in carbon, a sudden spike in global temperatures, an isotope shift that natural processes can't easily explain, or the presence of materials that nature cannot produce on its own. Although there is no evidence today that an industrial civilization existed in the distant past, this thought experiment still offers a logical framework for examining possibilities that might otherwise go unnoticed. By following this idea, scientists can develop new ways to piece together the long, complex history of our planet. Instead of focusing only on natural processes, they can broaden their perspective to consider whether any subtle hints of intelligence might be hidden in the rock record. This approach not only helps in the search for intelligent life beyond Earth, but also deepens our understanding of humanity's impact on the planet. And after these explanations, the story gently opens onto a new path. If a prehistoric civilization ever existed, where might their traces lie? What might they look like? And if Earth is capable of erasing its own surface through geological cycles, where should we look so that we don't overlook tiny but meaningful clues? These questions lead us into the next chapter, where our journey backward through time grows broader and deeper. We enter the immense flow of geological history, where every layer of rock is a memory of the planet, and where, perhaps, just perhaps, there might be faint echoes of a story long lost. To understand whether a prehistoric civilization could have existed, we first need to look at the length of the history of the planet we stand on. Earth is not a young world. It formed about 4.5 billion years ago, a number the human mind can barely grasp. If every year of Earth's history were reduced to a single grain of sand, the entire story of the planet would stretch out like a desert that reaches beyond the horizon. And in that desert, the entire age of humanity would be just a few tiny grains near the end of the path. Life appeared on Earth much earlier than most of us imagine. Around 3.5 billion years ago, the first microorganisms began multiplying in the ancient oceans. But it took such an unfathomably long time, so long that all of human civilization barely counts as a fading breath, before life evolved into complex, multicellular organisms. This happened around 540 million years ago, during what science calls the Cambrian explosion. It was as if the planet decided to open an entirely new chapter, bursting with forms that were richer and more diverse than ever before. From that point onward, Earth's history is divided into vast eras, each lasting tens or even hundreds of millions of years and marked by extraordinary changes. The Paleozoic era saw the rise of the first vertebrates, the evolution of plants onto land, and ancient forests blanketing the continents. The Mesozoic era was the age of the dinosaurs, lasting more than 160 million years, far longer than primates have existed at all. And then came the Cenozoic era, the age of mammals, eventually leading to the appearance of humans. If we compressed Earth's 4.5 billion-year history into a single 24-hour day, multicellular life would not appear until about 9 p.m. Dinosaurs would show up around 10 p.m. They would go extinct at roughly 11:40 p.m. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, would arrive at 11:59:59, and all of human civilization, from the first riverside villages to spacecraft and the internet, would take up just the final fraction of the last second before midnight. This perspective is not meant to diminish humanity. It simply widens the frame. Long before humans appeared, Earth had an almost immeasurable stretch of time to change, to break apart, to renew itself. Continents drifted, shattered, and recombined. Mighty mountain ranges were worn down into plains. Oceans rose and fell again and again. The climate swung through cycles of intense heat and deep glacial cold. And through all of this, life kept evolving. With this in mind, the question at the heart of the Silurian hypothesis begins to feel less strange. Given such vast stretches of time, is it possible that evolution might once have produced an intelligent species before humans? A species that used tools, extracted resources, developed social structures, perhaps even thrived for millions of years before going extinct, leaving behind nothing but compressed layers of soil where time continued to write new chapters. We don't need to claim that this happened. We only need to acknowledge that in theory, the time before humans is long enough to contain multiple cycles of evolution. If an intelligent species appeared 100 million years ago, every direct trace of them could have been erased by plate tectonics and Earth's relentless resurfacing. Mountains they built could have become fine dust. Oceans could have swallowed and replaced continents. The very lands they inhabited might now lie buried deep beneath the sea. Earth's history is not a straight line. It's a multi-layered cake, where each layer is an entirely different world. Some eras were far warmer than today. Others were so cold that ice covered nearly the entire surface. At times, atmospheric oxygen soared. At others, it dropped suddenly. In each of these contexts, life evolved along wildly different paths. Nothing rules out the possibility that intelligence might have sparked more than once, each time under its own conditions, only to disappear when the environment shifted too quickly or catastrophe struck. Of course, today, humans are the only known species capable of building an industrial civilization. But across hundreds of millions of years, that only tells us that humans are the only civilization in the thin, brief slice of time we occupy. It cannot prove that we are the only civilization that ever existed. What Earth's history teaches is simple. Every form of life arrives, flourishes, and eventually disappears. With enough time, almost anything is possible. And this is what makes the Silurian Hypothesis so compelling. It does not try to prove an ancient civilization. Instead, it places humanity inside the full 4.5 billion year story and asks, if someone existed before us, what traces would they leave? Could something in the geological record, in ancient climate patterns, or in small anomalies we've observed, be the fading echo of a story not yet told? Once this question is asked, the path forward becomes clearer. To know what a prehistoric civilization, if it ever existed, might have left behind, we must look at the evidence Earth preserves unintentionally. Sediment layers, rock samples, sudden climate shifts, odd chemical signatures. Any of these might contain clues to a chapter time has hidden away. And right here, the next question begins to come into focus. If a civilization truly existed somewhere in that vast, ancient timeline, what traces would they have left for us to find today? When we talk about a future millions of years from now, it becomes almost impossible to imagine what Earth will look like. Oceans may shift their shapes, continents may drift across the globe, and every city that exists today may vanish without leaving a single direct trace. But deep within the ground, where layers of sediment quietly accumulate through the millennia, the imprint of human civilization will linger in the form of geological signatures. These signatures are not houses or machines, but chemical traces, minerals, and environmental changes that humanity has created over just the last few centuries. Scientists refer to the period in which these signatures are forming as the Anthropocene, the age of humans. Whether or not this term should be formally adopted is still debated, but many researchers agree that human activity has become powerful enough to leave a lasting fingerprint on Earth's geology. If an intelligent species far in the future were to dig into the layers of rock from our era, they would unmistakably encounter the message humanity left behind without meaning to. One of the clearest markers lies in the changing carbon composition of the atmosphere and sediments. For more than 2 centuries, the burning of fossil fuels has released massive amounts of carbon into the air. This carbon carries a distinct isotopic signature, lower in carbon-13 than natural carbon. When this anthropogenic carbon dissolves into the oceans and becomes part of rocks and sediments, it forms a thin layer that reflects this isotope shift. Millions of years from now, anyone studying that layer would find something very strange. A global drop in carbon-13 that cannot be easily explained by natural processes. Accompanying it would be a period of rapid global warming, recorded in the chemical and mineral structures of the rock. Beyond carbon, humanity leaves behind another unmistakable marker: plastic. Plastic is a wholly artificial material, non-existent in nature before humans arrived. Billions of tons of it have drifted into the oceans, eroding into tiny particles that sink to the sea floor. In the cold, dark, oxygen-poor depths, microplastics can remain for millions of years, trapped within layers of marine mud. One day, a geologist from a distant future might drill into an ancient sediment layer and discover countless plastic fragments, relics of a world that once produced and discarded them on a global scale. For any intelligent species studying Earth's strata, the presence of plastic would be undeniable evidence of an industrial civilization. But perhaps the most extraordinary signature humanity leaves behind is radioactive. In the 20th century, nuclear weapons testing created isotopes that Earth cannot naturally produce on its own surface. One of these is plutonium-244, with a half-life of roughly 80 million years. In nature on Earth, Pu-244 is virtually non-existent. It appears only in cosmic events like supernovae. So if someone finds even tiny traces of Pu-244 in sediments from our era tens of millions of years from now, they will almost certainly conclude that it originated from technological activity. No natural process on Earth can create it. In addition to carbon, plastics, and radioactivity, there are many other signatures. Heavy metals such as lead, mercury, and cadmium, extracted and spread widely by humans, will settle into the ground and remain locked within sediment layers. Atmospheric lead levels surged during the 20th century due to leaded gasoline, and that increase will be preserved in rock. Meanwhile, concrete and steel will crumble over time, but the minerals and compounds within them will leave chemical patterns unlike those found in untouched soil. Another signature is biological extinction. Human activity is causing species to disappear at an accelerated rate. If a future scientist analyzed the fossils of our era, they would see a sudden drop in biodiversity. Large animals vanishing abruptly, coinciding with signs of pollution, rising carbon levels, the presence of plastics, and radioactive markers. All of this would form a clear cut in the geological record, evidence of a global shift driven by something other than natural forces. Looking at all these traces together, it becomes clear that humanity, despite its incredibly short existence, is leaving behind a distinct set of signatures in the planet's history. If someone millions of years from now studied the rock layer representing our time, they wouldn't need to find our cities or structures. The chemical signatures alone would be enough for them to infer that Earth once hosted an industrial civilization. And from this realization, the Silurian Hypothesis draws an important conclusion. If an ancient civilization existed before humans, it is reasonable to expect that they too would leave similar signatures, not stone buildings, but geological marks. What we should search for are not direct artifacts, but indirect traces of industrial activity, climate shifts, isotope anomalies, the emergence of unfamiliar materials, or unusual biological patterns. By the end of this section, the picture becomes clearer. To search for a prehistoric civilization, we cannot rely only on what appears on Earth's surface. We must look deep into the layers of sediment, where time silently inscribes its memories. And from that understanding, the next question naturally emerges. If a civilization truly existed in that immense stretch of time, why are their traces so hard to find? Once we understand the geological traces humanity will leave behind, the next question emerges naturally. If our civilization, after only a few centuries of industry, is already imprinting such vivid geological signatures, then why wouldn't an ancient civilization, if it ever existed, have left similar traces for us to discover? The answer lies within the planet beneath our feet. Earth is not a book that preserves every page. It is a journal constantly overwritten, smudged, rewritten, and sometimes burned and restarted. Only the toughest, luckiest details endure across millions of years. Earth is a restless planet. Its surface is never still. Unlike the Moon or Mars, where time almost sleeps, Earth constantly remakes itself. Mountains rise from geological forces and are ground down to dust by rain, wind, ice, and rivers. High plains sink into deep valleys. Today's beaches may become tomorrow's seafloors, and vice versa. Every cycle of rising and falling seas adds new sediment layers atop the old ones. And deeper below, tectonic plates push, collide, separate, and slowly drag entire ocean floors into the planet's interior. On average, every few tens of millions of years, most of the ocean floor is completely replaced. Ancient slabs of crust get pulled downward, melt into the mantle, and never return to the surface. Even the continents, the most stable parts of the planet, are worn down and reshaped over long cycles. For this reason, it is extremely rare to find surface rocks on Earth that remain intact for hundreds of millions of years. The oldest pages of Earth's journal have been torn out and recycled into new ones. Because of this process, any buildings, objects, or direct traces of a prehistoric civilization, if it ever existed, would have almost no chance of surviving. Even creatures that lived for millions of years seldom left fossils. For a living thing to become a fossil, it must lie in just the right place at the right time. Buried quickly in mud or sand, in an oxygen-poor environment that prevents decay, and then undergo a favorable mineralization process. Most organisms never pass through this narrow gateway. They vanish before fossilization can occur, and even fossils, once formed, can be crushed, recycled, or buried so deeply they can never be reached. If even the bones of creatures that lived for millions of years are rare, then subtler traces, tools, artifacts, or structures of an ancient civilization would have even less chance of surviving. A modern concrete building might stand for a few hundred years, but after a few thousand, it becomes rubble and rust. After hundreds of thousands of years, everything returns to dust. Plastics may endure for a while, but even they break down and blend with sediment. Steel corrodes, glass shatters, ceramics wear smooth. Over enough time, every manufactured material dissolves back into nature. Now imagine a city that once existed 20 million years ago, or 70 million years ago. Over time, it might have been buried by flooding beneath thick mud, then covered by fresh layers of sediment. Later, the entire region could have been lifted to form mountains, only to be worn away again by wind and rain. Then it could have sunk once more and become sedimentary rock. Eventually, as that rock approached the edge of a tectonic plate, it would be dragged down into the earth, melted, and lost forever. Not a single direct trace of that city would survive. Beyond the harshness of time, there is another issue: the limited size and brief duration of civilizations. Today's human civilization, for all its reach, covers less than 1% of Earth's surface with artificial structures. If an industrial civilization lasted only a few thousand years, a blink in geological terms, the odds that its cities would happen to lie in locations exposed millions of years later are incredibly small. Nearly zero. If an ancient civilization had existed tens of millions of years ago, it may have occupied only a small portion of the planet, and its era may have lasted only a short time. In that case, the probability that any direct traces survived and were later exposed for us to find shrinks to almost nothing. One researcher wrote that even Homo sapiens might leave no direct trace at all in the fossil record when viewed from the far future. Not because we are insignificant, but because time can erase everything. From all of this, an important insight emerges. If a civilization existed before humans, finding direct remnants of it is nearly impossible. Not because they were mysterious, but because Earth is constantly rewriting itself. What might remain is not carved stone, not tools, not machines, but indirect signs, chemical shifts, isotope anomalies, or sediment layers bearing the imprint of an unnatural event. And this brings us to the next question. If every direct trace is so easily erased, then might there be faint, unusual signals in the geological record, subtle anomalies, unexplained changes, that could be the key to tracing a civilization long vanished into the deep past. Once we understand how easily the traces of any ancient civilization could be washed away by time, a slow, quiet thought begins to form. If a prehistoric civilization truly existed before humans, might there still be indirect signs, faint streaks in the geological record, unusual events that modern science hasn't yet explained with complete satisfaction? From that question, the search for anomalies in Earth's history begins, as though we're opening an ancient case file in which every page holds a small mystery waiting to be examined more closely. These mysteries aren't sensational. They're subtle irregularities, just enough to make curiosity stir. If a prehistoric civilization ever did exist, perhaps they too would have left large-scale effects on the planet, much like humans are doing today. And for that reason, science has spent years analyzing periods in which Earth changed too quickly, too sharply, or too strangely compared to its usual natural rhythms. Among these case files, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM, is one of the events that leaves many people quietly wondering. Around 55 million years ago, Earth abruptly warmed by more than 5 degrees Celsius in an extremely short geological interval. At the same time, the carbon isotope ratios in sediment shifted dramatically. Carbon-13 levels dropped compared to carbon-12. This pattern looks strikingly similar to what we would expect if a civilization burned fossil fuels on a global scale, releasing vast amounts of CO2 that is light and poor in carbon-13. PETM is one of the fastest warming events in Earth's climate history. However, mainstream science explains PETM using natural causes, massive volcanic eruptions, or a sudden release of methane from oceanic hydrate deposits. These explanations have strong evidence behind them. Yet the Silurian Hypothesis poses a small, quiet question, not to deny science, but to widen the lens. Is there an exceedingly tiny chance that this might represent the final signature left by an industrial civilization before it disappeared? Not a conclusion, only a reminder that geological anomalies can be worth examining from all angles. Beyond the PETM, Earth's history includes many events that remain difficult to explain completely. The Great Oxygenation Event 2.4 billion years ago, when oxygen levels sharply increased. Mass extinctions such as the Ordovician, the Permian Triassic, and the Cretaceous Paleogene events. Yet all of these have strong natural explanations. Explosive growth of photosynthetic algae, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts. None of them require invoking an industrial civilization. This does not rule out the possibility of such a civilization. It simply suggests that if it existed, its planetary impact wasn't large enough to leave a global signature on par with Earth's most dramatic natural catastrophes. Perhaps their influence was local or brief, too small to carve its own distinctive layer. Meanwhile, many scientists have suggested that if traces of a prehistoric civilization do exist, they might survive only as extremely subtle chemical irregularities within ancient rocks. One often discussed example is plutonium-244. This radioactive isotope does not occur naturally on Earth unless produced in a supernova. Therefore, if Pu-244 were ever discovered in sediments tens of millions of years old, it would almost certainly point to nuclear activity by an industrial civilization. But so far, every ancient rock sample studied shows no trace of this isotope. Likewise, no artificial metals, plastics, or industrial materials have ever been found in deep geological layers. Yet this has two possible interpretations. Perhaps because no such civilization existed, or perhaps because our analytical tools still aren't sensitive enough to detect what time has thinned to a nearly invisible whisper. Another fascinating example is the natural nuclear reactor at Oklo in Gabon. Around 2 billion years ago, natural conditions accidentally created a functioning nuclear reactor beneath the Earth's surface. Although the radioactive materials have long since decayed, the isotopic evidence remains. Uranium-235 levels at Oklo are lower than normal, along with distinctive shifts in other elements. This proves that even after billions of years, a nuclear event can leave behind an isotopic footprint. And it leads to an intriguing thought. If a prehistoric civilization once operated nuclear power plants or triggered a nuclear explosion, similar isotopic signatures could remain. The real question is whether we've examined the right stones, the right layers, and whether any such signals might be diluted beyond detection by the vastness of geological time. Taken together, none of these unusual events provide compelling evidence for a prehistoric civilization, but they form a chain of hints, each one expanding the boundaries of scientific imagination. Earth has endured countless turbulent transformations, and among them are moments that echo, in small ways, the signatures of industrial activity. While natural explanations are overwhelmingly more convincing, the presence of such oddities keeps the question from being closed entirely. And that is why the Silurian Hypothesis remains such an intriguing line of thought. Not because it asserts anything, but because it invites us to observe the world with both caution and curiosity. Looking across all these signs, one temporary conclusion appears. Nothing yet is strong enough to convince us that a civilization existed before humans. Everything remains speculation, rooted in natural anomalies, interesting puzzles, and scientific detective work. But precisely because there is no definitive evidence, the human imagination has room to roam. And from here, the story shifts into another realm, where legend, myth, and cultural memory shape humanity's visions of civilizations lost to the deep past. As we look at the unusual signs in ancient geology and realize that most can be explained by natural processes, a soft pause appears between our thoughts. Even though none of these anomalies offer convincing evidence for a prehistoric civilization, something in us struggles to let the idea go. Partly because of the vastness of time, partly because imagination always slips into the empty spaces. And perhaps that is why, long before science existed, humans told one another stories about brilliant worlds that vanished across the ages. When the geological record falls silent, people turn to other sources, legend, folklore, and curious artifacts, as if trying to recover faint echoes from a distant past. Since ancient times, humans have recorded their curiosity through stories. Across many cultures, myths about glorious civilizations rising and falling appeared very early, passed from generation to generation. One of the most famous examples is Atlantis, the island said to have possessed a civilization so advanced it surpassed the world of Plato, only to sink beneath the sea in a single night of catastrophe. Atlantis isn't archaeological evidence, but it shows that the human mind never stops wondering whether history is more than what has survived. It evokes both nostalgia and longing, as if the world once held a chapter we somehow misplaced. Outside of the West, ancient India holds its own tales with similar tones. In certain old scriptures, there are descriptions of flying cities, vehicles that travel across the sky, and weapons of terrifying power. Modern scholars interpret these as religious symbolism or poetic expression, yet many people enjoy imagining that such images might arise from some faint memory, written down in mythic language. These stories aren't meant to prove anything. They simply create the feeling that beneath layers of time's dust, something may once have happened. Alongside myth, there are occasional reports of strange objects discovered in ancient rock. These stories often spread through popular magazines, mysterious forums, or word of mouth. Some tell of an iron nail found in a chunk of coal said to be millions of years old. Others describe a screw-like object inside a slab of ancient stone. One of the most well-known tales is the London hammer, a metal hammer encased in what appears to be solid rock. Such stories easily spark a sense of mystery. But under scientific scrutiny, most of them fall apart. These objects are rarely found in proper archaeological contexts. No formal documentation, no independent verification, and no clear evidence that the surrounding rock is as old as claimed. In the case of the famous hammer, geologists explained that the rock around it was simply a concretion of calcium carbonate formed over a few centuries or millennia, not millions of years. When the mineral structure was analyzed, it matched typical secondary mineralization, not ancient geological formations. Stories of fossil nails or fossil screws reach similar conclusions. Without independent verification, these artifacts remain anecdotes, not scientific evidence. But the important part isn't whether they're true or false. What matters is that each time one of these stories appears, even briefly, it stirs human curiosity. We know the odds are high that they aren't evidence. We know science requires far stricter standards. But in the quiet space of imagination, we still want to hold on to the feeling that something might be waiting to be discovered. And it isn't only myths or disputed artifacts. The idea of ancient civilizations is deeply rooted in popular culture. In Doctor Who, the Silurians are depicted as a race of intelligent reptilian beings who existed long before humans. Interestingly, the name Silurian doesn't match the actual geological Silurian period, yet the idea behind the show aligns beautifully with the thought experiment posed by the Silurian Hypothesis. Or consider the film 2001, A Space Odyssey, where humans uncover a black monolith buried on the moon, an artifact not of human origin, left behind by another civilization. Even though it's fiction, the image prompts a subtle question. If Earth can't preserve ancient ruins, might traces, if they exist, be hidden somewhere more stable like the moon or Mars? Books explore these ideas as well. In James P. Hogan's novel Inherit the Stars, humans discover the body of a man who looks exactly like a modern human, found on the moon and dated to 50,000 years old. Though entirely fictional, the story opens a familiar kind of thought. If a prehistoric civilization existed, could their traces lie somewhere time cannot easily erase? When we look at all of this, legend, disputed artifacts, and cultural imagination, we see that humans have always wanted to believe that history holds more secrets than we currently know. We understand that science has never confirmed any direct archaeological evidence of an ancient industrial civilization. All these stories serve only as reminders of how imagination naturally fills the gaps of what we do not know. But those stories also provide a foundation for the next step. If we set aside strict reality for a moment and allow imagination to stretch just a little, what begins to appear? If the Silurian hypothesis were true, if a prehistoric civilization once lived on Earth, what would they have been like? How would they have lived? And ultimately, what happened to them? These questions open the way into the next section, where the story shifts from external traces to imagining the shape of that hypothetical civilization itself. When the mysterious stories, ancient legends, and curious objects are placed back into their proper context, as pieces of imagination rather than scientific evidence, a quiet space opens again. A soft but persistent question appears. If we set aside every myth and look only at biological evolution and Earth's history, could any species truly have had the potential to become the planet's rulers before humans? This question is no longer folklore or rumor. It becomes a science fiction thought experiment grounded in reality. And in the space between what did happen and what could have happened, the mind begins to widen. If an industrial civilization existed before humans, the first thing to consider is this: which species had the evolutionary conditions needed to develop high intelligence? And during what period of Earth's vast timeline might they have lived? One of the most intriguing candidates people often think of is the dinosaurs of the Mesozoic era. Not because they were huge or fearsome, but because they lived for so long. More than 160 million years dominating the planet, while humans have only a few million years of evolutionary history. Across such an immense stretch of time, evolution could very well have produced a branch with exceptional intelligence. Most dinosaurs had small brains, but there were fascinating exceptions. Among them, the Troodontidae, species like Troodon or Stenonychosaurus, were known for having a brain-to-body ratio far higher than their relatives. Their anatomy was equally interesting: forward-facing eyes for depth perception, and forelimbs with relatively flexible claws. Based on these traits, paleontologist Dale Russell proposed a famous thought experiment. He suggested that if Troodon had not gone extinct at the end of the Cretaceous, perhaps it would have continued evolving toward higher intelligence. According to his reasoning, the brain size of Troodon had been slowly increasing over tens of millions of years. If that trend continued, they might eventually have reached a brain size comparable to modern humans. And with that enlarged brain, a completely new form could have emerged: a bipedal reptile, standing upright, with three-fingered hands capable of delicate manipulation, possessing language and a social structure. Russell called this hypothetical creature the dinosauroid. The idea was controversial. Many scientists found it too anthropomorphic, but biologically, it showed that dinosaurs were not an impossible foundation for the evolution of intelligence. If a group of dinosaurs had indeed taken the path toward higher cognition, and if they lived tens of millions of years before humans, they could be strong candidates for the first civilization. However, no fossil evidence, no trace of tools, no skeletal remains suggest that such intelligent dinosaurs ever existed. Still, from an evolutionary standpoint, the possibility is not ruled out. Aside from dinosaurs, the question turns next to ancient mammals. While dinosaurs thrived, mammals were tiny, mouse-sized, nocturnal creatures. But after the asteroid impact 66 million years ago wiped out the dinosaurs, mammals flourished. The vast ecological gaps allowed them to diversify into countless forms. Primates eventually emerged, leading to humans. But primates only appeared around 30 million years ago, and human-like forms just a few million years ago. There is no evidence that another intelligent primate species ever reached technology and then vanished completely. What about other mammals? Dolphins and elephants are undeniably intelligent. Dolphins show complex learning, sophisticated communication, and strong social awareness. Elephants have exceptional memory and intricate social structures. Yet building an industrial civilization requires much more: manipulating fire, metalworking, constructing infrastructure, abilities tied to flexible limbs and a land-based environment. Dolphins are limited by the water, and elephants by the lack of fine motor control. So despite their brilliance, their path to advanced technology remains extremely unlikely. A bolder idea involves marine life, especially octopuses. Octopuses have large brains, remarkable learning abilities, and tentacles so dexterous they can open jars, solve simple locks, and adapt their behavior creatively. Some researchers have speculated that if octopuses lived longer, their lifespans are very short, and developed complex societies, they might evolve toward cooperative intelligence. But again, an industrial civilization demands fire and metallurgy, impossible underwater. And even if octopuses built organic cities, every trace would decay completely. So this scenario leans more into imagination than realistic potential. In considering when a prehistoric civilization might have arisen, two moments in Earth's history stand out. The first is the late Cretaceous, just before the extinction 66 million years ago. The climate was much warmer than today, sea levels were high, and ecosystems were complex, filled with highly specialized dinosaurs. If intelligence evolved then, it would have had millions of years to develop. Another moment is around 50 or 60 million years ago, in the Paleocene-Eocene era. When mammals were diverse, the Earth was very hot, and many new species were appearing. However, the fossil record from that time is quite complete, and nothing shows signs of technological intelligence. Taken together, the dinosaur scenario remains the most captivating within the Silurian hypothesis. Not because there is evidence, but because evolution gave them far more time, broader opportunities, and at least one lineage with unusually advanced brains. After examining every potential candidate, a new line of reflection begins to form. If there truly were an intelligent species before humans, if they developed technology, built societies, and shaped the world in their own way, then all of it has disappeared without a trace. So what would they have looked like? How would they have lived? And what ultimately caused them to vanish from the surface of the Earth? After exploring the plausible evolutionary scenarios in the previous section, a quiet emptiness opens, like the story is waiting to be filled with imagery. Scientific reasoning can lead us toward possibilities, but only imagination can paint the scenery of a world long lost, if it ever truly existed. From that still point, the narrative slowly turns, no longer about fossils or isotopes, but a journey backward through time, toward a distant twilight in the Cretaceous. Here, the Silurian hypothesis is no longer a cold scientific question, but a gentle tale, one soft enough for the listener to half close their eyes and let imagination guide the way. Imagine placing yourself into the flow of time, about 70 million years ago. Earth was profoundly different then. Vast, dense forests stretched in every direction, filled with giant plants, from towering ferns to thick-rooted trees that sprawled across the ground. There was no ice at either pole. Warm climate encircled the entire planet. Sea levels were hundreds of meters higher than today, drowning many regions where human cities now stand. It was a green, humid, vibrant Earth, overflowing with life, yet holding secrets time may have erased. Within that setting, imagine an ancient city emerging near a newly formed coastline. It didn't resemble a modern city, nor was it loud or bustling. Instead, it merged seamlessly into nature, as though it had grown from the very trees, stones, and streams around it. At the forest's edge, towers with organic shapes rose upward, not angular but curved and leaf-like. Their surfaces were built from stone and fired ceramics in shades of brown, mossy green, gray, and earth gold, catching the last light of the day in a soft, muted glow. Between the structures, Broad pathways covered in moss connected to small plazas beside clear streams flowing gently through the city. Along the canal banks, the sunset stretched across the water, turning the sky a soft orange. Great winged creatures glided overhead, and on the far horizon, the ocean shimmered like liquid bronze. Everything blended into a scene that felt both real and dreamlike, like a moment time had chosen to keep for itself. In this city lived an intelligent species, the Ancient Ones. They were descendants of a lineage of smart dinosaurs that had continued evolving over millions of years. Their posture was upright, walking confidently on two stable legs. Their three-fingered hands allowed precise manipulation. Thin, smooth scales covered their skin in gray-green tones that blended with the forest around them. Small crests atop their heads helped regulate heat, and their large eyes were adapted to see clearly under sunlight and in the dim light of dusk. From the balcony of one of the city's towers, a few individuals stood still, gazing toward the horizon. They watched the first stars emerge on the deepening purple sky. Perhaps they too once wondered about the universe, about where they came from, and where they were going, the same way humans today look up at the stars, seeking their place in the vastness. Inside their fired clay homes, soft light glowed from bioluminescent crystals set behind windows. Perhaps these crystals were mined from cliffs along the coast, minerals that absorbed sunlight during the day and released it gently at night. Families gathered inside, telling their children stories of their ancestors and the journeys of long ago. Their ancient language flowed slowly and roundly, filling the space with warmth as night settled in. At the center of the city, an open square stretched beneath ancient trees. Residents gathered there to exchange goods, fruits the size of a person's head, shimmering minerals from the earth, and hides treated with a special tree resin that made them durable and waterproof. Nearby, artisans performed music on instruments crafted from reeds and seashells. The melodies rose and fell like wind moving through a distant canyon, gentle, resonant, hauntingly calm. Not far from the square, a small metalworking workshop sent a thin column of smoke into the air. Inside, metal was smelted using a type of plant-derived fuel, perhaps an early fossil resin of the era. The Ancient Ones had developed metallurgy at a simple but functional level, enough to craft tools, mechanisms, and basic moving parts. A few vehicles powered by steam pressure moved slowly along ancient stone-set rails. Under the tall fern canopies, the children of the Ancient Ones played. They chased small, friendly dinosaurs, creatures that had been domesticated for guarding or carrying goods. Their footsteps blended with the rustling leaves, creating a quiet rhythm that belonged to a peaceful world untouched by the catastrophe that would one day arrive. In the distance, the ocean stretched endlessly. Sea breeze carried a soft, salty scent into the city. Near the coast stood tall observation towers where astronomer scholars measured tides, charted winds, and watched the stars. Perhaps they had already discovered astronomical patterns humanity would rediscover millions of years later. Perhaps they carved the sky's motions into stone tablets with careful precision. Each discovery nudged their civilization forward, yet they remained deeply in harmony with the world around them. The entire city existed, like a half-real, half-dream painting, slow, serene, and peaceful. A moment so beautiful that no one living there could have imagined it might ever end. But Earth's history always follows its own rules. These calm hours were only a thin, fragile layer within the vast flow of time. And from the stillness itself, the natural question emerges: what happened to them? How did this ancient civilization disappear? And how did their entire story vanish so completely from the surface of the Earth? After the image of the prehistoric city rises beneath its pale golden sunset, where the lives of the ancient ones unfold in peaceful harmony, the story pauses for a moment. Every bit of beauty, order, and natural rhythm evokes a sense of a world breathing steadily, a place that seems as though it could last forever. But Earth's history has never been still. Every era has its beginning, its height, and its end, whether it belongs to an empire or an entire species. And when imagination is returned to the river of time, thin clouds begin to gather, carrying a faint feeling of what is about to happen to that ancient civilization. One distant evening, the sky above the prehistoric city seemed to hold something unusual. On all the nights before it, the familiar stars shone exactly as they always had. But on this night, a strange new light appeared in the dark sky. It was brighter than any star nearby, and it slowly became the most noticeable point for the sky-watching ancient ones. The light did not stay still. Each night it grew a little larger, a little brighter, like a quiet warning that the sky was changing in a way they had never seen. The elders and scholars gathered in the tallest observation tower. They charted the light's motion, studied its path, and realized it was drawing closer. In their ancient carvings, if any had survived, there might have been notes describing the growing unease spreading through their community as the bright point continued to widen at a speed unmatched by anything they knew. They lacked the modern knowledge to recognize it as an asteroid racing toward Earth, yet some instinct surely told them this was not ordinary. And then one day, the light ceased to be just a distant point. It became a long streak of fire tearing through the sky, brighter than anything they had ever witnessed. The heavens turned a blinding red. Moments later, the ground shook violently, as if Earth's heart itself had slammed against its chest. The ancient city's residents looked toward the horizon and saw a column of light erupt, so brilliant it split the sky in two. The sound came more slowly, but when it did, it shook everything. Towering stone structures quivered under the force of the shockwave. A wave of scorching heat blasted across the land, sweeping up ash and embers. Coastal forests ignited like enormous torches. Massive waves crashed against the shores, dragging boulders and tree trunks inland. The ancient ones had nowhere to flee. They could only hold one another, standing beneath the burning sky as disaster unfurled across the entire planet. Hours later, the fires spread far and wide, consuming places that had once basked in the warm Cretaceous sun. But the true devastation was still to come. When the flames finally died back, the sky thickened with ash. A strange, unnatural night fell over the planet, lasting not days but months, even years. The sun disappeared behind layers of dust so dense that no light could break through. Temperatures plunged. Even the luscious tropical forests withered. Food vanished. Ecosystems collapsed. In the ancient city, the survivors slowly sank into despair. There was no light for growing food, no resources to nourish the young. Their once vibrant structures stood silent in the cold darkness, surrounded by forests reduced to skeletal trees. Plazas that once echoed with music now held only the hollow sound of wind moving through broken archways. Social order began to crumble. Groups of survivors set out in search of new lands, but nowhere escaped the endless night. Their steam-driven machines could no longer run in a world with dwindling fuel. The knowledge they had gathered over millennia was forgotten as survival overtook every other concern. Little by little, they vanished, leaving behind only faint echoes of a species that once reached for technology, science, and art. One dim, gray dawn, after years of choking darkness, the sun finally pierced through with a weak, fragile light. But by then, Earth was completely transformed. The great creatures were gone, the ancient forests destroyed, and the city of the Ancient Ones was now nothing more than weathered stone buried beneath thick layers of ash. No more inhabitants, no more music, no more eyes lifted to the sky to record the movement of the stars. Earth drifted into a new era, a barren world waiting to be reborn. If that civilization ever existed, their final day would have left a wound on the planet. But over tens of millions of years, nature erased everything. Their world sank beneath sediments or was ground away by geological forces. By the time modern humans appeared, all they saw was a quiet planet, never knowing that before they arrived, another world might have once burned brightly. At this point in the story, a small silence forms. If the first civilization ever lived, they passed through time, disappeared, and left only the faintest scraps of memory behind. But the story isn't finished. More questions remain. How could all traces of them vanish so completely? How could an entire civilization, if it ever existed, be erased so thoroughly that no one could find them at all? When the story of the ancient civilization's final day ends in the darkness of ash and the silence of a world newly shattered, time seems to pause. Yet on Earth, no catastrophe is ever the last chapter. Even if an intelligent species disappears without a trace, the planet continues to turn. And from that quiet, a new chapter begins to unfold. So from the ruins left in the previous part, the story shifts softly toward what came after. What happens when the fires die out, when the ash settles, and when Earth begins to breathe again? After the devastating impact that burned forests and smothered the sky in darkness, the planet continued moving in its own ancient rhythm. Years passed. The thick ash clouds slowly pulled apart, letting faint shafts of sunlight touch the ground again. At first, the light was dim, diffused into grayish gold. But day by day, month by month, the sky began to clear. When sunlight finally pierced through the last layers of dust, a gentle pale blue stretched across the heavens. Earth had begun to heal. Buried beneath the ash, some seeds had survived, holding a small spark of life inside them. When sunlight returned, they sprouted. On the land that once held the ancient city, the first grasses appeared, tiny green threads weaving their way through the gray, opening the way for wild plants, vines, and small ferns. A few centuries later, vegetation covered the ground again. Like an old blanket Earth had patched with new, tender pieces. No one remained who could know that beneath that green fabric lay streets, broad plazas, and graceful stone towers. Animal life slowly returned as well. Small creatures that could survive long periods of darkness stepped out from burrows. They found food among the new plants, then multiplied. These tiny survivors became the ancestors of an entirely new ecosystem, one no longer dominated by giant species. Mammals, once only a minor presence in the Cretaceous, began to spread and claim new territory. A new era dawned, an era humans would someday call the Age of Mammals. While life above ground slowly revived, the ruins of the ancient civilization began a different journey, one that was slow, harsh, and unforgiving. The structures that survived the tsunamis and quakes continued to erode. Each breeze carried moisture that widened cracks in the stone. Each rainfall washed soil into the gaps. Within a few thousand years, an instant on geological timescales, their buildings lost their original shapes. New rivers carved paths through the land left scarred by the disaster. Sometimes, a major flood deposited thick layers of sediment, burying vast parts of the old city. Walls that once stood proudly were covered under meters of earth in a matter of decades. Metal tools grew brittle, rusted, or broke apart. Stone railways were swallowed by new grass, roots, and mud, and time did not stop there. Millions of years passed. After 1,000,000 years, the soil above the ruins compressed into layers of sedimentary rock. The ancient city became a faint, blurry band in Earth's geological record, yet even that was not destined to last. Tectonic plates shifted, lifting some regions and sinking others. Portions of the old city were dragged into the ocean, to places no one would ever discover. Other parts slipped into deep fractures and were pushed downward into the earth. 20 million years later, the last fragments of broken structures had faded into indistinguishable mineral traces. Artificial materials disintegrated completely. Physical evidence was crushed into tiny flecks mixed with fossilized remains of plants, mammals, and primitive birds. Nothing remained to show where nature ended and the old city began. 30 million more years passed. The layers of rock containing the civilization's memory were drawn into subduction zones, carried into Earth's molten mantle. Within flowing magma, everything melted away. No stone, no sediment, no mineral clues. Their material history erased at the root, as if it had never existed at all. As time continued its slow march, Earth reshaped itself. New mountains rose. Oceans expanded and retreated. Continents drifted and collided in the deep rhythm of the planet. On these reshaped lands, new species emerged, developed, evolved. And eventually, in a small corner of Africa, a primate stood upright, learned to use tools, kindled fire, built shelter. The first footsteps of modern humans sounded on Earth, never knowing that in a far-off chapter of time, another civilization might once have walked here too. When humans look at dinosaur fossils, they see only a world of giant prehistoric creatures. When they gaze at mountains, they see rocks layered over millions of years. No one knows that within some of those layers, there might once have been the remnants of an ancient city. And if someone stands beneath the night sky, wondering whether they are the first beings ever to dream, the answer, if this imagined story had once been real, was lost to time, long, long ago. In the quiet pause of the narrative, a gentle thought arises. If that civilization ever existed, it has been forgotten completely. Just like countless other stories Earth has lived and erased. And it is precisely this deep forgetting that explains why, when humans finally appeared, they found nothing but stone, sand, and fossils from a different age. Yet this also opens a new question. Could there be subtler signs waiting for modern people to discover? And if so, where might they be hidden within the countless layers of sediment and mineral that make up this ancient planet? As Earth's timeline carries us away from the catastrophe and into the long period of recovery, the story of the ancient civilization dissolves into the faint dust of history. Nature has completed its work, covering, burying, and renewing. Everything that once existed became mineral or merged into stone. And out of that forgetting, humanity evolved, appeared, and grew, never knowing whether anyone came before. But when modern science looks deep into the ground and the ocean floor, the question rises again. If that ancient civilization ever existed, could any traces remain? And if so, where? This is where scientific reasoning returns, slowly, steadily. After wandering through imagined chapters, Now we examine Earth the way one might investigate an ancient cold case. The suspects are long gone, the witnesses erased, and what evidence remains is weathered by time. Yet deep within the rock layers, tiny hints may still exist. Just enough to suggest Earth's story might be more intricate than we assume. And so, from the quiet renewal in the previous part, the tale gently shifts toward the next question. If any clues remain, where might they be hidden on this enormous planet? A first place to look is the deep geological strata. If the ancient civilization lived tens of millions of years ago, all their cities, structures, and industrial activity would now be sedimentary rock. These layers lie buried under hundreds of meters of earth, forever untouched by sunlight. Today, when humans drill for oil or survey deep rock, they sometimes pull up cores from far beneath the surface. In these cores, every band and every shift in sediment is a journal entry written by Earth. If one day, in one such core, scientists were to find a thin clay layer with an unusual chemical composition, perhaps unusually rich in rare metals, that might hint at an ancient industrial process. So far, nothing like this has been found. But the search continues quietly, like night watchmen listening for distant signals. Another direction lies beneath the deep ocean floor. The ocean collects sediment steadily for tens of millions of years. These deep-sea layers are rarely disturbed by weather or tectonics, making them Earth's most complete archive. When research ships drill into marine sediments, they sometimes retrieve long columns of layered history, carrying traces from eras far older than humanity. If the ancient civilization had ever used synthetic materials, plastics, polymers, or unique chemical compounds, tiny fragments might have drifted into the ocean, settling forever into these layers. Of course, no microplastics have been found from 70 million years ago, but vast areas of the seafloor remain unexplored, and each year analytical tools become more sensitive. One tiny anomaly, one molecule nature never makes, could open an entirely new chapter. Beyond strata and seafloors, paleontology offers another possibility. If the ancient civilization belonged to a species with a distinctive form, in theory, their bones might have fossilized. But the likelihood is small. Paleontologists have discovered countless dinosaur fossils across many families, yet none show oversized brains, tool-using hands, or skeletal structures suited for advanced manipulation. There are no opposable fingers, no unusually large cranial cavities. Still, scientists sometimes wonder whether indirect evidence could exist. A dinosaur fossil containing metal fragments no natural process could create, or bone beds arranged in ways that suggest a complex social structure. No such specimen has ever been found, but the possibility keeps a quiet corner of curiosity alive. Another common question arises: if a prehistoric civilization had technology, wouldn't their metal mines show signs of ancient extraction? Yet all rich ore deposits humans mine today show purely natural signatures. No half-finished mines, no cut tunnels, no tool marks. This suggests two possibilities. No ancient civilization ever existed, or if it did, its scale was far smaller than humanity's, limited to just a few regions. Over tens of millions of years, even the mines they once dug could have been refilled by sediment, compressed, and reborn into fresh mineral seams. Geology allows for this. Earth can recycle its own ore veins across vast cycles of time. Researchers occasionally mention unexpected places as well. Deep caves can preserve objects for astonishingly long periods. If an ancient civilization had stored items inside, perhaps a few fragments could remain. But most ancient caves collapsed, flooded, or eroded during those millions of years, making the survival of intact artifacts nearly impossible. Another intriguing idea is amber, fossilized tree resin. Amber can trap insects, pollen, even hairs or fibers. If a microscopic piece of technology had fallen into tree sap millions of years ago, it might still be preserved today. But nothing of the sort has ever been discovered, at least not yet. A crucial area of investigation involves chemical anomalies in ancient rock. If the ancient civilization used nuclear energy, they might have left behind odd isotopes, just as the natural nuclear reactor at Oklo left its unmistakable signature. Some isotopes have extremely long half-lives, meaning a few could survive tens of millions of years. But so far, no ancient rock sample contains artificial isotopic signatures older than humanity itself. It weakens the hypothesis, but also highlights how precise and careful the search must be. Listing each possibility shows a simple truth. Humanity has found no clear evidence of a prehistoric industrial civilization. This doesn't invalidate the Silurian hypothesis. It sharpens it. It makes scientists more cautious, more thoughtful. Every geological anomaly, every peculiar sediment layer prompts a quiet question. Could this be something other than natural? And in asking, science expands, opening new investigations not just on Earth, but across other worlds. As this section closes, one gentle thought surfaces. If any traces of the first civilization remain, they are still here, somewhere within this planet, waiting to be found. Perhaps in a rock core yet unpulled, perhaps deep beneath the unmapped seafloor, or perhaps right before our eyes, hidden simply because we have not yet learned how to see them. After looking into the deep earth, studying rock layers and sediments, and realizing that everything on this planet gets swept into the endless cycle of tectonics and erosion, the story naturally widens. When the possibilities beneath our feet begin to feel fragile, our gaze almost instinctively shifts upward toward the sky, where time moves differently than it does on the ground. If Earth is a book whose pages are constantly rewritten, then out there are places like nearly untouched sheets of paper, where history may lie preserved beneath cold dust. From that line of reasoning, this section begins right at the limit of the previous one. When traces on Earth are so hard to find, perhaps the answer lies somewhere not of this planet at all. The first idea is the moon. For billions of years, the moon has watched Earth change while barely changing itself. It has no atmosphere to stir winds or rains, no rivers to carve it down, and no shifting plates to erase its past. It is only dust, rock, and impact craters stacked through time. Because of this, anything placed on the moon, so long as micrometeorites don't wear it away, could remain for tens of millions of years, perhaps even longer. That makes the moon a nearly perfect archive for any civilization capable of leaving its homeworld. If a prehistoric civilization on Earth ever advanced far enough to reach space, they might have set tools, probes, or even ordinary objects on the lunar surface. Even a single shard of metal resting on lunar dust could remain there through countless ages. Scientists like Frank and Schmidt have noted that if evidence of a pre-human civilization exists, the chances of finding it on the moon may be higher than finding it within Earth's endlessly recycled crust. To this day, human missions have only surveyed the moon in limited areas. We've seen part of its surface, but most remains untouched wilderness. No one can say with certainty that those regions are completely empty. One striking detail is that humanity's own lunar artifacts will last a very long time. The bootprints of astronauts and the Apollo landers, if not shredded by micrometeorites, may remain for millions of years. This invites a gentle question. If humanity is unintentionally creating a time vault for the far future, could a prehistoric civilization have done the same? Might something they left behind still be waiting out there, simply overlooked by modern eyes? Mars is another promising destination. Its thin atmosphere brings little wind, almost no rain, and minimal erosion. Objects left on Mars can remain intact for extraordinarily long periods. If a prehistoric civilization once reached space, they might have sent robots, probes, or research stations to Mars. Such objects could still be resting under a thin layer of red dust, quietly waiting to be discovered. Of course, this scenario would require a level of technology advanced enough to cross more than 50 million kilometers. No small achievement. If we imagine they descended from intelligent dinosaurs, we must wonder whether a few million years would be enough time to develop spaceflight. It's an open question. But even with low probability, it remains within the outer edges of the Silurian Hypothesis, where every assumption must be considered before it is dismissed. Another idea involves artificial objects in orbit. If that ancient civilization launched satellites or built orbital stations, some might have once circled Earth. But over tens of millions of years, objects in low orbit would fall into the atmosphere, while those in higher orbits would gradually drift due to gravitational perturbations from the Sun, the Moon, and collisions with micrometeorites. This makes the survival of ancient satellites extremely unlikely. Yet there are more stable orbits, like geostationary orbit at 36,000 kilometers, where spacecraft can survive far longer. Even there, however, the span of tens of millions of years would reduce metal and composite materials to tiny fragments. If anything remains, it would be microscopic debris, extraordinarily difficult to identify. There are also deliberate searches. In 2012, researchers proposed using thermal and visual satellite surveys to scan the Moon for anomalies, objects that reflect heat or light differently than natural rock. So far, nothing unusual has been found. But with modern image analysis algorithms and machine learning, future searches may notice shapes or structures the human eye once overlooked. And from the present day comes a curious parallel. Humans themselves have begun thinking about leaving a letter for the distant future. Astronomer David Kipping has proposed building a permanent knowledge vault on the Moon, an archive preserving human history so that billions of years from now, long after Earth has erased our traces, something will remain. If humanity thinks this way now, it invites a soft, lingering question. Might a prehistoric civilization, if one ever existed, have carved a message of their own onto the Moon or another celestial body? That idea opens a broader horizon. Perhaps Earth's history isn't only under our feet, but also scattered through the night sky, on silent worlds where time moves more slowly. A metal structure buried beneath lunar dust, a strange object in Martian sediment, an unusual geometric formation on a near-Earth asteroid. Each possibility is faint, but none can be entirely ruled out. As this section comes to a close, a gentle reflection surfaces. If a clear clue from the first civilization exists, it may not be hidden in Earth's endlessly rewritten stones at all, but in places where time preserves instead of erasing. And perhaps someday, when humans walk across some untouched region of the Moon or Mars, they might find an object that isn't natural, lying silent for millions of years, like a whisper from a chapter of history we never knew. And from that thought, the story quietly opens a new door. If imagination can take us there, and if science is gaining the tools to search, then the next step is simply to look more widely. Because when we study the universe, we aren't only searching for alien life. We might also be searching for Earth's own forgotten past. And in that grand search, every star and every planet could be a fragment of the story we are trying to piece back together. As the thought of clues beyond Earth begins to settle, along with the delicate possibility that something strange might have been resting on the moon for tens of millions of years, the story gently turns inward. If an ancient civilization could leave behind traces like that, then what about us? What will our civilization leave for those who come after? After looking up at the sky to search for the past of a hypothetical species, it feels natural to let that same mirror reflect back on us. Because whether the Silurian hypothesis is true or not, Earth will one day ask of humanity the very question we are now asking of the imagined ancients. How long does a civilization's memory truly last? If, far in the future, humankind disappears, whether through climate change, an asteroid impact, natural cycles, or our own choices, then everything we build today will become layers of sediment for someone else to read. Looking back across this entire story, it feels natural to arrive at this thought. If a prehistoric civilization could vanish without a trace, the same could happen to us. And if it does, then after 10 million or 50 million years, what will this planet actually keep? Slowly, we can picture the answer forming, layer by layer. Modern cities of concrete, glass, and steel wouldn't last long on a geological timescale. In just a few thousand years, they would crumble and weather away. After a few 100,000 years, today's skyscrapers would be nothing more than scattered fragments mixed into soil. But given millions of years, these materials would be compressed and fused into sedimentary rock. One day, if someone drills deep underground, they might find peculiarly cement-rich, glass-speckled, alloy-filled layers, the faint geological signature of the Anthropocene. After 10 million years, most plastics would be gone, but a small fraction of microplastics might remain, trapped deep in ancient sediment as unnatural grains within the rocks. After 20 million years, many industrial heavy metals, lead from gasoline, mercury from factories, might still be detectable in a few thin bands. After 50 million years, almost every physical trace would be gone, except for a handful of radioactive isotopes with exceptionally long half-lives. What's left would be little more than subtle streaks in Earth's record, much like the strange hints we see today in events such as the PETM or other ancient climate shifts. This invites a gentle, unsettling question. If future beings, or extraterrestrials, ever study Earth long after we're gone, what will they think when they uncover a sediment layer filled with microplastics or unusual chemical distortions? They might conclude that a species once triggered global warming, caused biological extinctions, and ultimately vanished themselves. If all they find are chemical scars, the story of humanity would be reduced to something heartbreakingly small. From that thought, a deeper question rises. Is there any way for us to be remembered more fully? Is there any method to preserve the memory of humankind more faithfully than simply letting time erase us? There have been attempts. The Voyager Golden Record, now drifting beyond the stars, carries music, images, and greetings in dozens of languages. If it's ever found, it might tell someone that Earth once created gentle music and nurtured a profound curiosity. On Earth, we've built structures meant to last. The Egyptian pyramids are barely 4,000 years old, yet they could stand for many millennia more. Some modern projects aim for lifespans of hundreds of thousands of years. Underground vaults, inscribed stone slabs, gene archives sealed deep within mountains. Earlier in the story, we imagined a knowledge tomb on the moon. If such a vault were ever created, it would be humanity's way of whispering to the far future. We were here, even if Earth forgets us. But not everything we leave behind is something we want to be remembered for. Alongside art, music, and breathtaking monuments, we also leave plastic, greenhouse gases, damaged ecosystems, and global climate shifts. Looking at the traces that might survive for millions of years, we have to ask, is this truly what deserves to be etched into Earth's long memory? If an ancient civilization once destroyed itself through its own actions, even if only hypothetically, then that lesson becomes hauntingly relevant. Not as a warning spoken harshly, but as a quiet reminder that every human action ripples far beyond an individual lifetime. If we picture the beings of the distant future studying our traces, perhaps we see them standing over a strange sediment layer, concluding, "There was once a tool-making species here, one that reshaped the climate and ruled the planet. But we hope they find more than pollution and extinction. We hope they also discover messages we intentionally sent. Charters, art, poetry, music that reflect the better parts of who we were. If all they see is the damage, the story would be unfair to what humanity truly was capable of." This brings us to a final, gentle thought. Humanity stands between two possible legacies, one of disorder or one of meaning. We can destroy or preserve, harm or heal. And even though time may erase most of what we build, the choices we make today can still echo across deep time. This isn't a thought meant to burden, but to soothe us with the understanding that everything on Earth is connected across ages far longer than any single life. And so, one more soft question drifts in. If tens of millions of years from now someone digs into the rock layer of the 21st century, what will they see? A species rushing toward ruin? Or a civilization that looked up at the sky, created beauty, asked questions of the universe, and tried to save the world it loved? From that wondering, the story gently turns once more. If humanity hopes to understand its own history more clearly, perhaps it must look at subtler signs, not just in the earth below or on the moon above, but in the way we are living right now. Because the traces of the far future begin with the quiet choices of the present moment. And as we think about the traces humanity might leave for the future, another idea gradually rises into view. What if all of this is only a single breath within a much larger cycle of civilization? What if we are standing on one tiny point in a chain of rises and falls the universe has witnessed countless times? From that question, our journey gently shifts toward a broader perspective, one where we see ourselves not just as a civilization, but as a fleeting moment in time. Whenever we look up at a star-filled sky, the familiar puzzle of the Fermi paradox returns. If there are countless worlds out there, why has no civilization ever appeared to greet us? One simple, though somewhat melancholic, hypothesis suggests that civilizations in the universe rarely exist at the same moment. Perhaps over billions of years, countless civilizations have bloomed on distant planets, each shining brightly for a short while before falling into silence. So even if there have been many sparks of intelligence, they never shine at the same time long enough to notice one another. It paints the timeline of the cosmos as a long night, where tiny points of light flicker, flare, and vanish, leaving vast darkness between the stars. If we bring that idea back to Earth, we can imagine that even if a prehistoric civilization once lived here, they may simply have been one of those drifting sparks. They flared into brilliance long ago, then disappeared before humanity's light appeared. And if humankind eventually leaves the stage, Earth might one day, tens of millions of years from now, witness the rise of another species, another civilization. Evolution has shown, again and again, that life always finds a way back after even the greatest extinctions. When one set of species fades away, another rises to take its place. Looking back at the age of dinosaurs, no one could have predicted that the tiny nighttime creatures scurrying beneath their feet would eventually become the ancestors of humans. So in the distant future, when humankind is long gone, might today's most adaptable species, perhaps crows with their remarkable intelligence, or resilient rodents that survive every catastrophe, one day evolve into thinking beings? Might they develop societies, languages, tools, and eventually technology? This idea isn't meant to predict the future, but to remind us of a quiet rule of life. Intelligence may not be rare, it simply needs enough time. And if intelligence can appear again and again, then perhaps each civilization inherits something, unknowingly, from the one before it. Humanity uses oil and coal, vast resources formed across ancient ages. If a prehistoric civilization ever existed, perhaps they too used the long-accumulated treasures of fossilized worlds, and their actions may have left behind a subtle layer, rich in carbon or unusual minerals, that millions of years later humanity inherited without ever realizing it. It becomes a long, looping chain. Each civilization unknowingly builds atop the remnants of the ones before it. From this perspective, another possibility becomes clear. Perhaps intelligent civilizations are extraordinarily rare in the universe. Perhaps Earth has never hosted anyone before us, and perhaps after humanity is gone, no other species will reach our level for an extremely long time. Evolution doesn't follow a fixed route. The ingredients for high intelligence, a large brain, agile hands, language, complex societies, may be an exquisitely rare combination of chance events. If so, human civilization isn't a repeating cycle at all. It is a nearly unrepeatable miracle. But regardless of which scenario is true, one truth remains. Intelligence is never permanent. It is fragile, easily lost, easily washed away by any great upheaval in Earth's long story. Even within humanity's own history, we see echoes of rise and decline. Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Maya, the Khmer Empire, once magnificent, now reduced to scattered stones and memory. And these are only small cycles within a far larger rhythm of intelligent life itself. Viewed across hundreds of millions of years, every civilization, no matter how radiant, becomes little more than a passing breeze. Bright cities, monumental structures, grand epics, long dreams, all eventually fall into the quiet layers of geology. But this impermanence does not make our story meaningless. On the contrary, it makes each moment infinitely precious. When we understand that a civilization is merely one season in Earth's long year, we learn to cherish the season we're in. When we understand that intelligence is rare and perhaps more fragile than we imagine, we gain even more reason to guard it. When we understand that what we do today might become a lesson for whoever comes after, we become more mindful of our responsibility. And so, when we look at the cycle of civilizations, we may never find a firm answer about who came before us or who might come after. But we find something more important: the understanding that we are living in a moment that will never come again. A single, luminous instant in an endless river of time. That is precisely why it matters. Impermanence does not diminish the meaning of our civilization. It deepens it. Perhaps across the universe, civilizations bloom like short springs and fade like distant autumns. Earth may be no different. If there is a cycle, we are one part of it. And if there is no cycle at all, then humanity's appearance is even more extraordinary, something rare enough to guard carefully. Either way, the meaning stays the same. Every civilization is a gift of time, and our existence is a precious opportunity in the long story of the cosmos. When the reflections on the cycle of civilization come to a close, a natural quiet opens up. In that quiet, a familiar feeling slips into the stream of thought. If every civilization is only a brief chapter in the long river of time, what can we learn from the story that has stretched across millions of years of imagination and inference? From the idea that history might be larger than we once believed, we step into a softer space of contemplation, one where the questions aren't meant to worry us, but to remind us to live a little slower, a little deeper, and with more humility in this vast universe. One of the first lessons is humility. The suggestion that humanity might not be the first civilization is not meant to diminish us. It simply reminds us that intelligence may not be ours alone. If civilizations have flared and faded before, then our existence is only a small brightness in an endless chain of lights. But knowing we are small makes the present moment even more precious. Instead of imagining ourselves as the absolute center, we can see ourselves as a temporary, beautiful voice in Earth's long symphony of life. That realization doesn't stir fear. It opens a strange kind of freedom, one where we no longer need to prove anything grand, but can simply live in alignment with our best nature. From that humility, the lesson of sustainability appears naturally. If the imagined ancient civilization collapsed due to natural disasters, climate shifts, or their own carelessness toward the environment, then their story becomes a mirror for us. Even though it is only speculation, it closely echoes the warnings of modern science. A civilization can be powerful for a time, yet fragile in the face of changes it creates or fails to foresee. So the lesson is not fear, but awareness. Awareness of the planet's fragility, awareness of the consequences that can stretch across millions of years, and awareness that if humanity chooses to live more gently with nature, we might avoid the sorrowful endings imagined in those hypothetical chapters of the past. Another important lesson from the Silurian thought experiment is the connection between science and imagination. Data alone could not have spun such a long, tender story. But imagination without science would drift into shapeless fantasy. Only when the two blend do we get a framework that invites meaningful questions. How would we recognize the traces of a civilization in the geological record? Which sediment layers hold secrets? What new tools must we develop to detect chemical anomalies? Thinking about a prehistoric civilization doesn't pull science away from reality. It pushes science forward with questions we never thought to ask. Through those questions, we better understand the marks of the Anthropocene. We learn how to search for life on other worlds, and we discover that measured imagination is a beautiful part of exploring the universe. From there, a deeper reflection emerges. The miracle of life itself. Whether another civilization ever existed or not, the sheer fact that life can rise from tiny cells, endure countless trials, and evolve into beings capable of dreaming about the past and future is already astonishing. Life isn't a straight line. It is branches, collapses, recoveries. And if some civilization really was erased long ago, then their disappearance is like autumn leaves falling in an ancient forest. One season ending so another can begin. Understanding this doesn't make us sad. It makes us feel more connected to life in every form, and it reminds us that humanity, though delicate, carries a remarkable strength. the strength of curiosity, of questions, of the desire to understand. When we gather all these lessons, a single feeling rises to the surface. The Silurian Hypothesis isn't meant to give us a definitive answer. It is meant to open a quiet space for reflection on humanity's place in the cosmos. It reminds us that we are living in a rare moment when intelligent life has the chance to think about itself. It suggests that every action we take today may become an echo in a very distant future. And it rekindles a natural curiosity, the gentle joy of wondering about the unknown, like a child gazing at the night sky and asking why the stars shine. From these reflections, the story brings us back to where it began, the quiet night sky. There, all the lessons settle softly like sparkling dust, and in that moment, we hear only the faint whisper of time itself, inviting us to step into the final chapter of this journey, where everything will be gathered into one complete, gentle, serene view before the story closes. As the quiet reflections of the previous section slowly settle, a familiar feeling rises, as if the entire journey has been guiding the listener back to the place where it began. From the lessons of humility, sustainability, imagination, and the fragile beauty of life, a door opens, inviting us to return to the night sky where all questions were first born. And in that return, the story enters its closing chapter, where time is no longer a stern current, but a peaceful backdrop on which we can look back at the long path we have traveled. Under that sky, the familiar image of night appears once more. The darkness softens, and the stars, so distant as to defy comprehension, still shine as quiet, unwavering points of light. The listener may remember that in the beginning, this very sky started everything. Questions about vastness, about hidden possibilities, about histories stretching far beyond human sight. And now, it is the same sky that guides us into the final thoughts of this imagined voyage through science and story. In that open space, we realize that the stars overhead are not just shining for humanity today. They once shone for countless creatures before us. And if the ancient civilization we imagined truly existed, these same stars would have illuminated their cities, settled softly on their ancient rooftops, and reflected in the eyes of their prehistoric citizens. That image turns the night sky into a silent witness to all rises and falls, a mirror time has never managed to dim. From that constancy, we understand more about the nature of time itself. Time is not merely a stream of days slipping by. It is the accumulation of countless stories, countless beginnings and endings. Time does not rush. It moves slowly, patiently, with a quiet way of smoothing every trace. Civilizations, no matter how brilliant, leave behind only faint lines in rock, subtle chemical signatures, or a handful of unanswered questions for those who come after. But that fading is not a tragedy. It is simply part of the natural cycle. And recognizing this brings a rare sense of peace. If every civilization eventually returns to that same quiet plane, humanity need not carry an enormous weight of fear. We only need to live and grow with awareness, adding one beautiful chapter to the shared timeline of Earth. In this stillness, the meaning of existence becomes clearer. Whether we are the first civilization or merely the next link in an endless chain, the chance to live in this moment is already a gift. Under this night sky, every breath, every thought, every dream becomes part of the universe's living map. We do not need to know with certainty whether any ancient civilization truly existed. What matters is that we are here now, gazing at the same sky that every generation before us has lifted its eyes to. In that moment, the connection to history, both real and imagined, grows deep and gentle. With that spirit, a wish for the listener arises naturally. After a journey through grand hypotheses, imagined worlds, scientific reflections, and quiet philosophy, this is the moment to let go of whatever tension remains from the day. Perhaps the listener is lying in a familiar room or resting their head on a pillow that carries the scent of everyday life. But above all, they are on a planet that has endured uncountable trials. A world that has seen dinosaurs vanish, oceans change, continents drift, and perhaps, long ago, even witnessed the rise and fall of other civilizations. The simple fact that we are here now, thinking about all these vast things, is already a small miracle of the universe. And so, the listener can allow sleep to arrive. There's no need to cling to any thought, no need to solve any lingering question. The mysteries of the Silurian Hypothesis, the idea of prehistoric cities, the traces hidden in geological layers, the imagined citizens under ancient stars, all of it can be set aside for another day. Tonight, it is enough to know that the universe is still wide, the planet is still turning, and the stars are still present. We are a small part of it all, and we are allowed to rest. Allowed to let the mind float softly among these gentle reflections before drifting into sleep. If tonight's dreams carry the listener back to the ancient cities we imagined, or out into the distant sky where secrets still wait in silence, then that is simply another beautiful step in the journey of imagination. And if that dream brings a calm that lingers into tomorrow morning, then the story has fulfilled its purpose, not to offer conclusions, but to plant a mood of openness, curiosity, and ease. And like all gentle stories, this one ends with something simple and sincere. Sleep well. Wherever you are, under whatever sky, may you find your own quiet peace tonight and carry this warm stillness with you into the morning.